This is Tyler, your antisocial critic and the host of the AntiSocial Network, your number one source for anachronistic conversations online. Come join us each week to hear opinions from some of the best voices discussing entertainment, politics, religion, and modern life on the internet today, most of which you've never heard of, but I have. This week we're joined once again by two guests we've had on before. We've got Hannah Long once again, and we have Ethan Collins again. How's it going, both of you?
It's going well. Staying busy.
I'm sure you are. How are you? You staying busy there, Hannah?
Yeah, pretty much. Well, actually, it's a quiet season in publishing, but just getting ready to do some travel.
Okay, so yeah, we're all moving towards keeping busy, but yeah, so all three of us have written both pieces on Green Knight, and that's kind of the discussion topic I wanted to bring up, because both of you kind of published stuff in the last 2 weeks that was kind of inverse of each other insofar as you both had very different reactions to it, and I basically agreed with both of you, which is an interesting experience because it's a very complicated movie. But I wanted to kind of go through it and see if we could maybe come to terms with it, because it's been about a month now at the time of recording, and this movie still seems to be drawing some pretty diverse reactions. So I don't know what the best place to start on this, but maybe we could have both of you kind of give us a brief summarized version of the pieces you've released recently.
Yeah, let Hannah go first, yeah.
Yeah, so let me know if my internet is skipping in and out. I'm trying to figure it out myself. I was really looking forward to this movie, so I was a little bit bummed that I ended up not totally thrilled by it. And, it felt like it had been coming out forever with the pandemic delaying everything. And so once I finally got around to seeing it, I was very hyped. Went to see it with my siblings over in Manhattan. And I think my expectations were probably somewhat shaped by a previous film of Lowry's that I had seen, the director Lowry, which was Pete's Dragon, which of course is not really a good touch point to understand this movie at all, I don't think. But I think what struck me throughout was that there was a lack of clarity of definitions. And this is something that I complained about in my review. It's a very editorial complaint. I do complain not so much what it is, but definition is, but that the definitions are not clear enough for us to make decisions about the moral choices of the characters. And this is something that I skipped in my review, but that I was the original lead for it, which I wish I hadn't cut. I wrote this in the laundromat on my phone, and I'm like, well, this is probably not good, but I wish I'd left it in there, because I think that it was a key missing point in my review that people weren't getting, is that I think when you make a movie, you have to do external world building and internal world building. And by that, I mean, you have to create a physical world with established characteristics and rules and all those things. It's usually what people think of when they hear the term world building. But you also have to create a world where the moral rules and the internal logic of characters make sense. In this particular film, I really felt like the moral rules of the universe were very vague. What did the characters think about A, B, and C? Where in time were they? And I was very confused by that, because on the one hand, they talked like they were from their era. They used a lot of metaphors and language that was fit into a Christian pagan era of time. Yet in their uncertainty and their vagueness, their modern, it was a confusing mixture of things. I was never quite sure where characters were coming from. Were we supposed to be viewing them with modern mores in place, or were we supposed to be thinking in the terms in which they would have thought in the period? And so that led a lot of confusion for me. And so I ended up titling the essay, "The Green Knight Has No Chest." reference to the C.S. Lewis quote, expect honor from men without chests. And I think that that's an apt quote in that it does two things. It brings up the fact that these are characters who are clearly modern in that they haven't been taught what honor is, which I think is a great point that Ethan made in his review, is that these are clearly characters who don't actually know what honor is. But I think what the movie doesn't correct for is the fact that the audience also doesn't know what honor is. And so when these characters are searching for something, and then they talk about goodness and greatness, and they come to certain conclusions at the end of the film about what those are, then I don't think that the film is going to be so open to interpretation with the audience that it's not going to land. At least that was the way it was for me. I was just thinking, what does this film think greatness and goodness are? Does it expect there to be a general understanding of what those things are? And if so, what is that? And it just never seemed to quite cohere for me. So anyway, that's very long-winded. But that would be an explanation of sort of my issues with the context of the film, the communication of the film, and what I feel was missing with it.
Okay. And what about you, Ethan? Because you wrote a much more glowing review of it than either of us.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I guess my view was extremely positive, and I do think it's an incredible movie. In my opinion, it's one of the best American movies I've seen in quite a while, as I kind of do point out. Well, I kind of mentioned in my review as well. To me, I guess just my experience with it, so I'll kind of lay that out like Hannah did. I think all three of us were the same way. We all love the source material, or some of the material surrounding the source material, at least. And then, we saw the trailers, which looked like they were, going for a more traditional look at the myths involved. And then, of course, it got delayed with COVID and all that stuff, like so many movies have. And when it came out, I think a lot of us were confused by, not confused by it. I mean, I think you could expect that to be a little more either postmodern or whatever you want to take on it. But I was, to be honest, kind of expecting it to go a little, and I don't even want to say postmodern, because I do think that David Lowry in it thinks there is truth. And I think he thinks that it's something that can be attained, but postmodern in the way of kind of re-examining myths and kind of coming at them from a more contemporary perspective. So I wasn't quite as surprised by that. And especially having seen a ghost story, I wasn't surprised by kind of the ambiguity of some of the themes involved. Just to me, when I watched it, I know what you mean, Hannah, by saying that it doesn't necessarily clearly lay out the morals of its universe necessarily. But to me, what I saw when I watched it, and what really just super fascinated me, and what I try to bring out in the review that I did, which, by the way, is a much less high-profile review than yours. I mean, Hannah's was in the Dispatch, and yours, Tyler, was in Geeks Under Grace, and mine was just on my own personal website that I occasionally post on. So,
well, let's be fair here. Geeks Under Grace has literally dozens of readers. So
there you go, dozens. But no, the kind of the perspective I had on it is that it's basically the filmmakers' perspective themselves, because it seemed to me, especially the way that the film interacted with the plot of the original Sir Gawain and the Green Knight poem, that was coming from a place of at least respect, and I think love, for the poem, but as a contemporary person reading it and putting themselves into kind of those shoes. So, the main character himself, and his viewpoint, he has no kind of perspective on what honor is, or, what it means, what even really truth means, what greatness means. And in my kind of take on it, I had that, like a lot of men, especially today, but everyone today, he knows that he needs to attain honor, but he doesn't know how to get that, and that hasn't really been taught to him. He has an uncle who is King Arthur, obviously, even though his name Arthur is not mentioned in the movie, really. I don't think it is at all. And then he has a pagan mother, and both of them are obviously very spiritual. I mean, they show them both in the movie, obviously as a witch and then as a Christian, who, you know, mentions his beliefs at least a few times in the movie, and is the only person who really does mention it a lot. But they haven't really reached out. So I kind of saw it as a kind of like a coddled boy, still living with his mother, you know, still kind of under the protection of that kingdom, and then but not having really been taught the ways. The people in leadership just kind of assumed that he was going to learn those ways without the hardships that they had to go through. So that's definitely the perspective I saw it from. And then, I mean, I think we can kind of start talking from there. And I don't know how many spoilers you want to get into and things like that.
It's been a month. Let's just say the whole thing is. If you have any interest in seeing it, go watch it and then come back to this.
Yeah. So I don't know how coherent the way I just described my experience was, but that's definitely kind of the perspective I was coming at from the piece, as seeing kind of a contemporary, postmodern young man thrown essentially into an old world, so that he doesn't know really what the morals of it are, even though he has this sense that there is honor that he needs to work toward. And we can kind of discuss that.
I think that read is correct. My problem, I guess, is kind of what Hannah was nudging at, is who is this for? Like, is this I mean, obviously we all have our prejudice as people who have read classical poetry and know what the actual poem is kind of trying to go for. About the story of actually living up to your morals and facing temptation, what it means that what it means to actually face all these challenges through the classical medieval worldview, and living up to integrity in a culture that demands it. And you're right in saying that it definitely is about putting a modern protagonist in that place, but again, who is this for? I mean, there's so much weird attention to detail that I'm forced to assume that David Lowry really likes the poem and probably has done an inordinate amount of research into medieval literature to some degree, or at the very least he picked up a copy of Distant Mirror at some point. I assume he's done the homework, and there's enough anecdotal evidence just in the film that you get the sense that he knows what makes the poem work, because it shows up in here in different forms. But watching it as someone who likes the poem, it almost feels like I'm being pranked. Like it's clearly loving enough that it understands it, but it's throwing such strange interpretations of it at the wall that it feels like either you don't know what all this is and you're just being thrown in it for the first time, or you do know what all this means and it's purposely going out of its way to make you feel weird. Like I remember almost feeling like not disgusted, but like extremely uncomfortable watching some of the scenes, like especially the temptation scene in the castle. It's does not end in a way I thought was presentable in a. What's the appropriate way to say he jizzed on a napkin? I mean,
I will say that the less than ideal way to view this is with one's younger siblings. Not a fun time.
Oh no!
They're both how young?
Both adults at this point.
Okay.
Still.
I'm still.
Oh jeez.
So I read the poem senior year of high school. Completely forgot it, and then went to see the movie a few weeks ago. So I actually went in remembering almost nothing. I actually conflated it in my mind with one of the Canterbury Tales. And so I really didn't know anything about it going in except the most basic bones of the plot. So I think that also probably didn't help me because I was trusting the movie itself to give me a framework to interpret the internal story. Is that I didn't know what any thing that was not really holding my hand, not necessarily to hold my hand, but I want to be held a little bit, I guess. And in my review, I went on and on about Westerns, partly because I've been geeking out about that this whole
Which
year.
Which is awesome.
But yeah, when I get into something, I get really into it. And I think everybody just thought that this was me being like, well, if things were back like they were in the 1950s, then this movie would have been better, which was not my intention. But I think that I didn't realize that most people don't think of Westerns as an art form. They think of them as a old reactionary storytelling device. But what I was thinking of was the sense in which those films really do a good job of creating their internal rules, what the code of honor means to people, what it means to not live up to it. And so I was just watching an interview with David Lowry, YouTube things they do, and he ended up by saying this is a story about recognizing that your legacy doesn't matter if you're not good, which seemed to actually perfectly encapsulate the best interpretation of what the ending would be, and was something that I actually thought, oh, that's a great message. It's that it is one of those movies where that realization comes at the end. It just didn't seem to me like it was the accumulation of each lesson that he learns throughout the plot. So there's a bit of an episodic nature to it that I think also tends to muddy the water. If he's learning in each scene something that is helping him to make that realization at the end, what is that thing? Sometimes I feel like he's learning something. Sometimes I feel like we're just sort of there for the sense of style of the thing.
Can we say that he actually learns anything in the plot, though? Because, like, my interpretation was that he basically fails at every single quest except for, like, one. Like, every single serious challenge he's faced with, he either gets robbed, or he fails miserably, or he says something that undermines his virtue as a knight. It doesn't really. It just seems like the farther he goes into his quest, the more unvirtuous he becomes and reveals himself to be. And by the end, that's just kind of the full deliverance of that, up until the final moment, which I think in some ways actually does kind of save the film from just being completely, like, morally empty. Like, if that last scene doesn't exist, this film is just a roller coaster of nihilism that just from beginning to end, like, there's just, at that point, there's nothing to redeem it.
Well, in answer to you, Tyler, I mean, and I would push back against that a little bit by saying one episode that people have pointed out a lot as saying, like, does it really have meaning to the plot is the one with Saint Winifred. And it's got to be, as far as I can tell, I'm not 100% sure what it means at this point, but she is only one of 3 characters who's actually named in the movie, as far as I can remember. You have Essel, Gawain, and Saint Winifred, who, of course, her story is a little different from the actual story of the actual saint, but that's supposed to be important, depending on, obviously how we interpret it is kind of still up for interpretation. But I do think it's supposed to be that he's learned something at that point, if only how not to act. It's like he only gets examples of what not to do, and not examples of what to do. Even when, he's, with the magical couple, basically.
That is true. Is that, like, that scene in particular with Saint Winifred really did feel like moral story where he learns what you don't do, which is that you ask for a reward instead of diving to get somebody's head, which is, of course, just the signature one, like knighthood 101. You don't ask for, like, for a reward before you dive to get a skull. Anyway, but it's an example of things not to do. That might just be the whole motto of the movie is Sir Gawain and what not to do when you're a knight.
That's true. Also, I will say it's significant that he continues to go toward the goal. I mean, he doesn't have to. There's so many chances where he could just turn back. But I think it's supposed to be, I think David Lowry really is trying to say that there is something there pulling him toward that final destination. He knows somehow, I don't know if it's supposed to be inherently or not, because obviously he has the pressure when he's back, in the castle, King Arthur and his mother, to go out on the quest. But after he's gone on it, that pressure is not there any longer, and we can assume that he's out there, for a very long time. I don't know how much time in the universe it's supposed to be that he's been traveling, but I got the impression that it was, quite a long journey. Although, again, it doesn't really tell you that. Well, and it does make the time of the journey definitely shorter than in the poem. But I do think that his vision at the end has significance beyond just my legacy is going to be bad, so I'm going to face my death. Because I don't think necessarily, and of course this is the complete spoiler, that he actually dies. I mean, I think they're definitely, because that's part of the debate as well. Like, does he actually die at the end in this version?
Supposedly Lowry said in one of his interviews that there was a cut of the film where it cuts from the Green Knight saying "off with your head" to him immediately cutting off Gawain's head. So I guess the implication is this is the happy version of his execution, where
I don't know.
He dies a good death instead of dying a bad death. So that I think the implication is that this is the happiest ending he can work his way into, given the circumstances.
Well, I mean, that depends on how much weight you put on directors' comments on the movies, especially right when they're coming out. I don't know. I kind of tend to disregard them a little bit, and I know that's probably not the right way to look at it.
We don't have to get into a death of the author debate, but I'm
not a death of the author proponent, but I just think there's so many things sewn throughout the film, implying that he is probably going to survive it. I mean, and then again, I mean, of course, Hannah's point that it's so ambiguous that, you could interpret it in such wildly different directions. So I guess to me, it ends up being more of an illustration than a moral tale, really. An illustration of kind of the place young men are right now. And as we can look back on classical works, young people, we can look back on classical works, but if we haven't been taught a structure, then if we go toward honor, the only way it's possible to attain honor is probably through really harrowing circumstances. And that's kind of what I take out of it, even if that might ultimately mean death. But yeah, I definitely understand the ambiguity kind of working against it in a certain sense.
Well, this is an interesting vagary of the film, is that the movie doesn't really go into the Green Knight's reveal from the poem.
Right.
I mean, not spoiler alert for 800-year-old poetry, but turns out the Green Knight is the Lord of the Castle, and he's working for Morgan Le Fay. That doesn't happen in the movie, and it's left extremely ambiguous what he is and why he showed up in the first place, other than that there's some sort of tepid connection between him and Morgan Le Fay that's implied at the beginning of the film.
Well, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that his mother is wanting to get him, out of the house, so to speak, work him toward greatness. And I do think there's a lot of implication for instance, Saint Winifred, one of the last things she tells him after, he brings back her head is that the Green Knight is someone you know. And to me, it does seem like there are other implications later on that Joel Edgerton, the Lord of that castle, is the Green Knight also. But I guess you guys tell me if you think I'm crazy for thinking that.
maybe, I mean, maybe the implication is that the ending of the film like cuts off right before the poem ends, and that we get the same exposition dump that we get in the poem, where it's like, it was me after all, but I'm gonna let you live because you were mostly virtuous instead of not at all. And
there's a third ending where he just takes off his head and then it's Edgerton, and then he kisses the one at the end of the movie.
That's one way to look at it.
It's the whole one's mother being behind everything twist was a little bit bizarre for me, because it's sort of a Bildungsroman story in that she wants him to go out, but also she wants him to go out and be tempted by evil, weird things.
Well, the poem it's somewhat ambiguous. Well, not even ambiguous. She flat out tells Gawain gets flat out told that the goal of sending the Green Knight to Arthur's court was to scare the crap out of Guinevere, and with the hope that she might faint and die. Like, him cutting off the Green Knight's head and then having to get caught in this Christmas game was completely a secondary effect of what happened. It was not supposed to wind up that way, at least the way the text implies it. Like, so much of what happens in the movie is kind of adding additional layer of subtext where, Gawain didn't have to cut his head off. He could have just, nicked him, and then the game would have been over, and then this would have been the story. And it's clear that the movie's kind of building up his Gawain is an idiot kind of characterization. Like, he didn't have to just go straight up, but he did it anyway. So there's added layers to this that are in the film that aren't in the book, or that aren't in the poem. But the way it's portrayed, just from an authority standpoint, it completely changes what the Green Knight is thematically. I mean, and in this, there's the line where the princess of the castle says that green is the color of death, and that more or less lines up with the Fey implications from the original poem. But here, it's almost entirely clear that to stand in the presence of the Green Knight is to stand in the presence of your death. That's what it meaningfully is to Gawain. It's what it meaningfully is to the story, and it just it ends up. And there's the line when he shows up to the Green Knight's chapel, and you just see the rotting nature all around him. And Gawain asks him, "Is this all that there is?" And then the Green Knight says, "Well, what else were you expecting?" And the implication is that there's nothing else to life. You're at all times you're always just barreling towards your death, and the only thing that matters is what you do before that. And that kind of robs a lot of the implicit Christian moralism of the poem. Am I wrong in saying that, or?
See, I really liked the ending of the movie the first time I only saw it the one time. I was thinking, oh, this is actually trying to ask that question, which feels like it has been right off screen for all of the movie, which is this all there is? So as I was watching it, I was thinking, this is a question that probably should have been asked in Act 1. As I was thinking about it, is that maybe that was a question to have in Act 1 and then build up to it. But maybe that's just what it is. It's that he keeps wondering why he gets to here, and then he finally has the presence of mind to ask, wait, why did I do this? Maybe there are other options. And I was really struck by the fact that there were spells in that moment, that it was almost as if it was saying, there's a worldview that doesn't look at it this way, except he doesn't have the tools or the teaching or anything to contextualize that. He just knows that he doesn't want to live a life that is just pure hedonism, which is an interesting twist for him, because he doesn't seem to have had too many issues with that up until this point. I mean, there are scenes which push him to have problems with it, where Essel from about it, where Lady Bertilac, who I actually was super confused when I was watching the movie. I'm like, so that is Essel. why is she here now? And did she grow her hair out? Did she get hair extensions? Like, I kept thinking, okay, we're supposed to interpret her as the same person, but then I realized that we're not. So that was super confusing to me on the first viewing. She was supposed to be sort of like the evil mirrorverse version of Essel, presumably, that leads him astray. And so he's had all these things which basically give him an ability to confront his own lustful, his own ambitious sense of being. And at the end, he decides, I don't want to live a life solely defined by that. I don't know what else there is, but I don't want this. And so I like that in a vacuum, in that, like, there is just sort of a rejection of what not to do when you're a knight.
Right.
At the same time, it does feel a little bit anticlimactic, because it doesn't feel like an organic growth in his psychological development. And I think a problem is the fact that, like, Patel's performance is very he is very much a guy who gets swept up by things. And what's going on inside his head is usually difficult to determine from minute to minute. He's not a very verbose, he's not a very eloquent guy, which, okay, yeah, I guess, but it's a bit of a struggle when there's just don't have that window into his head at a given moment. So it feels like at the end, you do get a vision into his head where he's glimpsing a future without honor, or without, well, I'm not sure I would even call it without honor, without goodness anyway. He knows this is not good. This is not him fulfilling his duties to other people. He doesn't know what else. The only other option he sees. So it's better to die than live without honor, which I'm like, okay, I can get on board with that as a moral. But there doesn't seem to be a vision of how to live a good life.
Yeah. There's
a vision of how not to live a bad life, but there's not a vision of what a good life is. And so the question would be, is that a problem? Is it necessarily a problem, or can you just approve a film that just makes these things happen in their absence? I think The Dark Knight is an interesting film in that, like, it's also very much about the consequences of nihilism. It's asking those questions much earlier, and so I think it feels ready, and so it feels like the filmmaker knows where he's going, just on a craft level. Yeah. And it also does have a little bit of a glimpse of what a good and virtuous life is, which is to show a degree of mercy. You have characters like the prisoner in that one scene on the boat, who throws away a chance to basically save his and many people's life, but in a good way. And there are no similar examples of that in this movie. I'm not sure that that's a lack. I'm not sure, but it does feel like there's a. I wanted to know what, because it does drop hints throughout of, like, you should be good as opposed to great. And so in my head I was, well, that means that his ambition is a problem, his searching for a legacy is a problem, that it seems like that they're setting up a contrast between those two things, and that contrast later parallels the red versus green things. So red would be ambition, it would be honor, all of those things. And yet in the last scene, clearly he gives himself to death, which is within sort of the code of honor. That action is not something that fits into the sort of more female view of things earlier in the film, which is that, like, well, you should just not even play the game at all. He does abide by the rules of the game, and so, and of course, supposed to be a good thing that he is abiding by the rules of the game, has at some points been seen as maybe pointless. But is there anything more than just playing the rules of this honorable game? What is the goodness that you add to greatness? I mean, anyway, I'm just throwing a bunch of thoughts at the wall to see what sticks, but I think that's also what the movie is doing. So
right. Well, one thing I have, you're saying that it doesn't offer any character, I would argue that it does offer King Arthur as a character who is good. And I guess a lot of that is going to depend on how genuine you think David Lowry's look is at King Arthur and all the dialogue he is delivering. Because, I mean, to me, the movie doesn't seem like it is criticizing, because King Arthur has that speech where he says, I am lucky to be here with you. We've created peace through our actions, that you all together through brotherhood with me. There's a little bit of talk of some of the same things that would be involved with chivalry, although not kind of really stated. And we see that kingdom. I think that Lowry is looking at it as a good thing that they have created. And then as Gawain keeps on going further and further out, away from the reach of King Arthur, things keep getting wilder and wilder, you know. And it also depends on, he goes through that scene, I think it's significant, where so many people are cutting down trees. So, I mean, it could be me bringing my previous biases into the movie, but to me, I do kind of see that, and I don't think the movie definitely argues against this, as this honor that King Arthur and his particular knights had did bring peace and organization to this world. But the natural order of the world is to bring chaos. And if that peace is not maintained and passed on to the next generation in a very purposeful way, nature and chaos is just going to come right back in and swallow it all back up. Just like the Robert character talking about how the earth will suck up all the bodies into it. So I guess it kind of depends on whether you're interpreting Lowry's perspective there as being on the side of nature or being on the side of civilization. To me, he just portrays King Arthur in such a positive way that I don't think he's on the side of chaos. I think he is on the side of that peace that King Arthur has brought. And I don't think King Arthur's speech of the fact that these men, through their often violent actions, have brought peace to the world, is supposed to be seen ironically or anything like that. What do you all think about that?
Well, it's basically the unironic version of Peacemaker's speech from the Suicide Squad, where he says, I love speech so much, I'm not afraid to kill as many children as necessary to protect it. And it's just, he's willing, I mean, he's the serious version of that idea where you have to fight to bring peace to the world. You have to fight to bring civilization in. But
and yeah, go ahead.
I just don't know if it earns it by the end. I mean, other than the fact that it portrays King Arthur in very, very glowing terms.
Yes.
The movie is mostly allergic or indifferent to the religious implications of what's going on, and I suspect that's probably why they jettisoned the original ending of the poem, where he survives and marches back to Camelot with with a greater sense of understanding of himself. Like there could be a version of this movie where there's another 10 to 20 minute epilogue where we see the good version of the vision he sees, and he ends up actually becoming a virtuous king, or dying a virtuous death and becomes the knight that we know of in the original poem. But it doesn't happen. He never becomes Sir Gawain. He's still Gawain by the end of it. So,
right. But I will say the Green Knight. Oh, who is it? Is it the Green Knight or is it the Lord of the castle who talks about him? Oh man. Okay, I'm losing. What he needs to become a knight. Anyway, okay, I'll go on past that. I think it's really significant how the Green Knight looks at him when he takes off the belt, and how the Green Knight seems to definitely know what that belt means, and said, I don't remember what his exact words are, even though I watched the movie again 2 days ago. But he says that's a good thing, he's like good or something like that when he takes off the belt. So it seems like he was aware previously, and that him removing it could be a possibility. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's a sense in which the Green Knight does seem to have a sort of moral authority at the end to speak to Gawain. I would say, just as far as King Arthur goes, I feel like the goodness in King Arthur was almost an accident, in that, as again, going from a David Lowry interview, he said that his original view of character was to be sort of this austere, corrupt, almost slightly naive. He describes them in terms of childlike or extraterrestrial creatures, Guinevere and Arthur. But he said what actually happened was that Sean Harris got on set and started speaking these words and brought his own sense of great warmth to it. And so I wouldn't necessarily say that the true meaning then is what Lowry said in the interview, because you have the end result, which is partly also Harris's interpretation, and then Lowry's the fact that Lowry let it happen. But I think almost the fact of like Lowry was like, oh, that's an interesting thing. Let's just leave that in there. And now it's made his authorial. But I do agree with him that it gives it a very nice texture. I like Harris's performance very much. He's you're never quite sure what to do with him because he does look creepy. He's got that Sean Harris voice. If he was saying, Gawain, actually it was me that was the Green Knight all along. I'm like, oh, but also with his eyes.
Yeah, like, that's true.
I mean, he looks creepy, but he does have this sense of like tired goodness to him. Mm-hmm. Like it's almost like the end of the poem, which I this afternoon is over. Wayne at the end of the poem comes home with a renewed sense of his own fallibility and of his own weakness, and he's humbled, which actually is nice because he's a little bit annoying throughout. Of just like he's so good. I'm like, okay. So finally, the fact that like he comes home humbled, it made me happy. But Arthur almost feels like he is that character, is that he has lived life and he's recognized that that he's fallible and that he hasn't treated Gawain well or Gawain's mother, and so he's trying to make amends, and that is in the text. Even without Harris's performance, he feels failure and he's trying to remedy things. And the other movie that I compared this to, which I think on reflection it very, very much resembles, is The Last Jedi, and because it's a movie about failure. It's a movie about failure and how failure is the way to succeed. In that, like, the vision of success is failure, and an interesting thing to go from a Christian perspective, because there's a degree of truth in that we do have to live, we do have to take up our cross and all of that, but there's very little sense of resurrection in this particular vision of failure.
That's true.
Because you do have these archetypes who are good archetypes, but they're good because they are acknowledging their failures and they are flawed. They're acknowledging their feet of clay. Like Arthur is a myth, but he's a myth who has deconstructed and has like been on Twitter talking about deconstruction, and and Gawain has to become that too. He has to become like go on his journey to become a myth, embrace failure, embrace that. I mean, this is all somewhat in the original poem, so I'm not sure that this is just all like Gawain goes woke. I think that there is definitely a sense that I definitely think there is a sense in the original poem that Gawain, what he learns is failure. And yet he's the failure who sees a life beyond failure, who carries his badge with him like Jacob, with a limp. And that actually would be a good comparison too. Is Jacob wrestling with God, receiving the mark of his weakness within him, and then continuing out. And in this movie, he gets the mark of weakness, and then that's the end of the movie. So there's just a little bit of a like, oh, okay, is that, yeah.
Well, I like The Last Jedi. I actually had kind of like thought and then forgot about that Last Jedi comparison. And of course we've got Tyler's poster right there in the back, kind of reminding us. I will say a couple of things that definitely set this apart from The Last Jedi is that I do not think The Green Knight is a self-aware movie in that regard. And I think it's a much more earnest movie. I mean, to me, I think David Lowry, even though he makes occasionally extremely ambiguous movies, often then offset by extremely non-ambiguous movies, he does not have that kind of ironic or super self-aware thing that really annoys me in a lot of movies. He seems very, very earnest.
And I'll also add that he's not woke progressive in the way that something like
no.
This like of all my complaints with this, and I've seen a lot of like Christians and traditional classicists who don't like this movie, and my central complaint of this, it's not that it's woke, it's that it's that it's not interested in the implications of the themes of the poem in the spiritual sense, because it's really hard to divorce chivalry and knighthood and the Arthurian mythos from the Christian ethos, and then just put a modern ethos in it without just making it feel purely materialistic.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what this movie felt like to me. Is that it felt like you felt keenly aware of just how close these characters were to death, and how meaningless their death felt at all times for them. And I brought up the example of when they get to the Green Chapel, and you just see this little tiny worn out church that's completely covered in moss, and it's slimy. Like it gives you the sense it's like that feeling of disgust you get when you imagine your grave and you imagine like your body just decomposing. It got that same kind of sense of discomfort just in that little chapel. So it's much more. The film just kind of gives off this sense that it's much more. It's wrestling with the same kind of existential angst that the poem is also dealing with, but it's just not taking it all the way. And because of that, I think it loses the ability to really kind of get at the revelation that poem kind of gets at when it finally does reveal the truth.
Yeah. One example I'll give, I have a couple of answers, well, not answers, or answers and agreements to what you're saying. One example of the fact that is not woke is the fact that obviously one of the woke things that people talk about a lot is toxic masculinity, right? But the end result of toxic masculinity would be the idea of Gawain, I think, would be the idea of Gawain and the vision he has. But the people who toxic masculinity would usually be ascribed to are King Arthur and his knights, who have not brought that hectic, chaotic future. They brought peace and stability. Whereas the person who is definitely not a toxic masculinity stereotype is the person who would bring that chaos and destruction. Then another thing about the Christianity, I just still feel like David Lowry appreciates the Christianity of it, but is looking at it from more of a contemporary perspective. In that, I mean, Christianity is obviously a huge part of King Arthur. Is even in this movie, he's very Christian. I mean, he seems to take it really seriously. It's not like in some movies that you might see. There were a lot of movies in the '90s where a person was supposed to be very Christian, then they toss it off or whatever. Like, yeah, I'm Christian, but I don't really care about it or whatever. He does seem to really care about it. He really does seem to care about the ritual and all of it. But he hasn't really passed it on. And I really feel like the movie is commenting on that if it's not passed on, that the chaos and that nature creeping back is just going to take it back over. And I see that with the cross. The cross is sitting there. It was something great once. That chapel was probably something very beautiful once, and you can see kind of like the beauty of it. But it's been taken back over by nature because it was not tended to.
I will say, though, for comparison, this probably is the most overtly Christian film A24 has ever released and ever will release, which isn't saying much because there's a like. Am I the only one that notices that their movies have a lot of like pagan imagery to them? Like it.
Yeah.
But
pagan imagery is better than no spirituality.
I know some Catholics.
Go ahead, Anna. I'm sorry.
No, Memory had a fairly good some scenes at churches that were quite entertaining. I really enjoyed the elderly. I think it was like a Vietnam two in that, who also had like completely wacky Pentecostal going on, but I'm met like his particular type several times, and so I was like, yes, I've never seen this in a movie before, but I know that guy. So there is that one. It's. I think so much of this comes down to how one views civilization at the beginning of the film, as whether it is a good thing or a bad thing. And my conception of it was that it was sort of it was viewed as sort of this safe and almost claustrophobic thing. At the same time, like there is a sense in which Arthur, you made a good point that like he acknowledged that he had not done his duty to this son, like that he had not been what he should have been was a father, and he was not, and that's a really interesting sort of like fatherless paradigm that I'm not sure the rest of the film follows up enough to like make me think that that's something that we're really supposed to focus on. But it's the more I think about it, I could see that interpretation. I do just like find it difficult to see the kingdom at the beginning as some sort of realm that we're supposed to think that this is the character should aspire to, just because of the way it does have that. I mean, we start out in the kingdom, but it's in a brothel. Now, yes, that's because Gawain has decided to be there. I'm just going to pronounce his name like 5 different ways throughout here.
Well, the characters in the movies do too.
But the movie does that too, so whatever. Yeah, so anyway, George, just start throwing at all sorts of things at the wall. Anyway, but and this is, I think, partly probably budget limitations. So much of it is inside, so much of it is sort of like musty and dusty and dark. And so my impression as I come away from it is not, oh, this is somewhere we want to be. Because so many of the interiors in the film feel sinister or feel claustrophobic, which again, is that what are we supposed to take away from that? Is this just Lowry telling us I don't have the budget to light all of this? A lot of my interpretation was that there was a really stark contrast between the wildness and the freedom of the pagan outdoors, in which anything can get you, can sneak up on you and get you, and the relative safety of being indoors. And so there's a sense in which you have to leave home. You have to go outside and face those things in order to, well, okay, the movie doesn't quite know what in order to means, but you have to leave. You have to leave home. That there's a sense in which you can't just avoid death forever. You have to go out and then do whatever one does in the process from leaving home and then getting to one's death. So Camelot was like home, not necessarily in a homely sense, but in a mother's sense, and that like it is a place that you need to leave. What it would mean to return to it at the end, is there a vision for what Gawain's like good and righteous kingdom could be, is a little bit more ambiguous.
The words I'm thinking that are coming to mind when I think of this Camelot are coddling and entropy. Like, this feels like an old place. Like,
yes.
With King Arthur, I mean, he's like obviously the original interpretation was supposed to be he's the old corrupt leader. Sean Harris brings in the warmth, and so I guess the result you kind of get is that you get both of those things, where he's the last breath of an old civilization, which isn't inaccurate with the Arthurian mythos, because the fall of Camelot is the one of the few things that like happens in every version of the story, where it's like everything about it is essentially doomed by its own by the sins of its own members.
All falls in on itself. Yeah.
So I think that there's something to the idea of you must go out into the wilderness to find yourself to escape the coddling of this worldview. Although it's if the subtext is that it's coddling because civilization, Catholic and civilization is inherently coddling, which may or may not be what the implication is, and that the wildness of the pagan civilization is the resolution to that. That would probably be a bit simplistic, and I don't think this is going for like full Avatar, like, you know, you must escape civilization and live among the trees. Like, it's not. I mean, it's saying something a little more subtle about the need to escape crushing order and the need to, but also how the crushing and anarchic the world outside of that order is. So it's
because that's quite an interesting thing. Is that I think a lesser film would have just had like corrupt civilization and like Avatar out this utopian nature. That this is where you find true enlightenment.
They're an autonomous collective.
Would be a criticism level that yes, that Gawain goes out and then he takes off all of his armor and then just becomes like sort of this Native American noble savage. That's not what this movie is doing. Yes. I think that there's a real sense in which nature is the antagonist and the protagonist in certain ways. In that, like, there's just this, that man is a parasite and nature is trying to eliminate it. It's that there's that man is just kind of constantly being, well, that's not what I meant to say. It's that man is
unusual,
constantly being by nature. There's a sense of entropy that is trying to push him out, and we're not supposed to see this as a good thing. Like, this is a threat, and it's felt throughout the film that there is a threat, that there is just the fallen nature of nature. Nature is not your friend. Nature is red in tooth and claw. It is here to kill you. And yet at the end, the Green Knight is this figure who should feel threatening, and yet in a strange way feels comforting. Who is he doesn't feel like someone that I'm afraid of. Exactly. I mean, I feel the danger of death, but there's also sort of a kindly Grim Reaper element here that softens it a little bit. Maybe he just reminds me of Old Man Willow, but like a sort of Old Man Willow crossed with Tom Bombadil. What if Tom Bombadil was the one that tried to kill the hobbits? But and
now I just want to hear the old the Tom Bombadil song with like horror music behind it.
Yeah, just a horror movie called Bombadil. Bright blue his jacket is.
I can just see it like you're playing the soft piano music, and it's not like and it's just, hey Tom, Betty Dong.
Oh jeez.
Yeah, and so it's interesting because I'm always interested to see how movies portray death and like how we're supposed to think about death, and I feel like a lot of movies either go two directions.
Right.
Either they get something that is so terrifying and overwhelming that there's no way that we can actually overcome it. That it's like, it's just unremitting horror. Yeah. Or they sugarcoat it and they make it just something where like, oh, well, they're just beyond the veil. Like, this is a movie that is not saying they're just beyond the veil. They're saying like, oh no, they're like worms inside their head. Like it's going right for the body horror. I love that scene where, and I think this sort of sets up the time travel gimmick that it does twice in the movie, is that it goes from going tied on the ground all the way around, and then oh my gosh, and then comes back, and it's so that was a great moment, really underlining this is what happens with nature. This is what death looks like. It's not glamorous, or it's not it's not. Ultimately, this is what your legacy will be. Yeah. And so there's a real memento mori there that treats death like it's something terrible. What it doesn't treat death like is an aberration. And that's an interesting and I think pagan point of view. And so there's again, like there's never a sense of like a Christian view of death in the film. Again, not necessarily a criticism, just an observation that has a view of death. I think it has a true to its paganism view of death, and that like if you are a pagan, then you probably should view death as something dreadful, and that ultimately all you can do is hope that it wears the face of Tom Bombadil instead of Old Man Willow. That you hope that death comes in a friendly way, but there's no alternative to that. And so the only way to do that is to try and live with honor up until that point. So there's, and yet, I mean, as you also say, is that there's a clear sense in the movie we do want something that's more than this, even if that's not necessarily explicitly tied to the Christian symbolism in the film. There's a sense of longing and a sense of wanting meaning at the end that is there. It's just I'm not convinced that Lowry knows what he's looking for or has a sense other than just like he throws his cards in the air in the end. It's like, well, I don't know what was the game about. I mean, that's true to a modern aesthetic, I guess, or to a modern point of view. I'm just not sure that that's something that I necessarily applaud. I don't find it terribly profound because it just says what we all feel right now. Well, what a lot of people feel right now. In the sense that it has the intellectual integrity to portray paganism without sugarcoating, or I find that going the horror route and is a little bit more true and are actually integrity filled than going with the truth. But at the same time, the ending is sort of like, well, death is a kindly master, which is, I mean, it's evocative and it's really engaging and everything. But at the same time, I'm like, death is not like that. Not throughout the film. And in the end, is he really is the nature of the Green Knight true to the sense of what nature is like that has been established throughout the film? Anyway, I'm freaking out here.
No,
I figure out what the nature of the Green Knight, the Green tells us.
Yeah. Well, those are a lot of good thoughts. I think it's really important that one of the things that David Lowry specifically kept is the Christmas framing of the movie. Now, we could argue about whether or not he did that just because it's in the poem or not, and he loves the poem, or if he did it specifically. I mean, I do not get the sense that David Lowry is a Christian. I don't think he is. I think he's trying to figure out what to be. And I think he's using this movie as part of his own exploration. And I think that's part of the reason for the positives and negatives we're pointing out. But the Christmas framing definitely brings in something to think about, at least, with the fact that he's introduced to a hope for a sort of quote-unquote salvation on Christmas. And he's given his final confrontation on Christmas. To me, that's still significant. Now, of course, we have to decide whether or not David Lowry meant to put that in there thematically.
It might be a carryover, but I think he kept most of what's in the film there fairly on purpose, so I'd be willing to give that the additional subtext, probably just because it's carrying over much of the implicit subtext of the original poem for doing the same thing. So
he even includes also, another thing he includes is the gold that Gawain wears, which in the original poem, gold so signifies inner goodness. And so that implication to me seems to be that Gawain is externally not a good person. Essel says earlier in the movie, why isn't it enough for you to be a good person? But to me, his total, he knows he's not a good person either.
Well, there's a distinction to be made, because he's not a bad person in the sense that he does evil things or is cruel or does anything like that. His badness is defined by his lack of virtue and honor and his relative ignorance. It's not that he's he's not malicious. He just doesn't know what he's doing or what he's looking for. So it's not the same as saying he's a bad person. There's a desire within him to carry on goodness and to actually attain the greatness he aspires to. It just doesn't.
Yeah.
He doesn't know what the journey is. And it's probably why the film is played as a surreal horror movie. It's because he's experiencing it as horrific and incomprehensible and strange, and it just adds that extra layer to it.
Yeah, and that's why I think that gold is significant. Externally, he's not a good person, but he is. There's something inside that can have goodness. So that's why I think that the fact that they still keep the fact that he's wearing gold colors in it, and also when he has his vision. Which, by the way, we haven't talked about, but I think that the Green Knight gave him that vision in this version. But anyway, when he has that vision, if I'm not mistaken, he's not wearing gold anytime through that vision once he gets back, is he?
That's a good question, actually. I'm not sure.
I wish I remembered more clearly, but I don't think he is. I think he's wearing more blue.
I don't remember what his necklace he's wearing. I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention.
Well, I meant gold colors. Like he has a lot of like yellow and gold on him.
I remember there's the scene, I think from the very first shot of the film where he's thrown and then it zooms, you see the green girdle around him, but I don't remember whether he's wearing gold or red. I feel like it's red, but yeah. Anyway, I did notice as far as the use of gold and particularly blue is that he has Mary on his shield, but the shield is broken fairly quickly once he leaves. Safety of Camelot. His faith and his shield is not terribly helpful. I do feel like they could have at least sent him to night boot camp before sending him out, because send the fella out with some pepper spray, or something. Come on. He's a passive character throughout, which I guess also reflects a certain sort of aimless millennial youth who wants to find honor, and particularly males who do want to go out and find destiny and be ambitious and all those things. All of things are things which I actually really resonate with, and so I'm like, yes, men need to be like this, and also me. But
absolutely,
this is how I can. But he's wanting those things, except he is someone who just gets swept along by the plot throughout. And I think this is just a general comment, that discomfort that I have with it as someone who has thought a lot about ambition as I'm trying to think through what my own decisions are as a Christian in terms of ambition, and who also thinks a lot about the way that our culture views ambition and views heroism and making it, and whether or not it's even possible to succeed without oppressing someone. So personally, I don't resonate well with characters who are very passive and who just let life happen to them. This again is a subjective thing. I just think that usually stories that are about someone who is not making things happen but is letting things happen are not terribly interesting. The story may be, but it's not interesting. And so I think that was a struggle for me to actually care about Gawain as I was trying to root for him. I wanted him to be someone who started to take control over his life. I'm starting to sound like Jordan Peterson. Gosh. Anyway, it's like, Gawain, clean your room.
We got to know what Jordan Peterson thinks about this movie.
Yes. Yeah. Gawain, clean your room.
Yeah, I mean, I see it though, because I know exactly what kind of movies you're talking about. That where the difference I see here is that he's trying to make things happen, but he's just so inadequate that, I mean, he did decide. The whole quest is set off by a decision of his own, at least. At least the story starts because of him. Unlike some of those stories you're talking about, at least. Yeah,
there's a sense in which there's there's a definite contrast throughout the story between order and chaos. And Arthur is an order maker, and his mother is a chaos maker. And so when he finally gets to the end, then he has to decide how he's going to respond to this manifestation of the chaotic nature. And his resolution is, it's almost like with order, which is inherently oppressive, which would be what would happen if he kept the girdle, and if he went back and basically just like took what he wanted without any regard for the people that he hurts along the way, which is sort of the ultimate manifestation of red, of lust, of all of those ambition without any thought. So there's a contrast in order, which this is the only representation of what an order he would create is like, or chaos, which is to the night. It's death. It's entropy. It's giving in to the ultimate end of life. And so his solution to that is just to recognize that chaos is inevitable, but to meet it with as much honor as much dignity, perhaps would be a better word, to meet chaos with dignity.
Yeah.
And so that feels like about the answer that the movie can scrape together to this is that this is the only way to resolve this. And it's an interesting thing because it can't quite think of a way of order that is not oppressive, and should. So I wonder if we are meant to imply when Essel is talking to him about marriage, that a good order is marriage, that he would be faithful to her, and I would assume that that's what we're supposed to imply. But it's also a little unclear throughout whether or not that's the good society that they're supposed to be striving for. Then what is the movie's point of view on the prostitution issue? Because I was never quite sure whether this was something that we're supposed to disprove of. I think it's only something we're supposed to disprove of when the one does it. There's no sense of judgment about Essel's actions in the plot, which again I somewhat danced around a little bit in my review, is that that clearly the movie just sees the power dynamic and doesn't see fit to really think about whether or not there's any with her actions. It knows that there's something problematic, and that clearly that a better way would be some sort of marriage or commitment. So I guess that's really perhaps the only vision that the movie gives of a healthy order is what can be inferred from her words there. It's just not a lot.
Well, I mean, I think it's pretty significant, because also we see the relationship that the married Arthur has with Guinevere. I mean, that is shown as a very loving. I mean, she is willing to sacrifice herself for him. She takes, because she knows the letter is magic. She's afraid that it will, she doesn't know what it'll do to him. Will it hurt Arthur? So she takes it and reads it herself. So there's this kind of self-sacrificial commitment scene between Arthur and Guinevere. And even at the end, when they're obviously both dying there together, they're very loving toward each other, very caring. They're obviously caring for each other right up to the end. And then we see this relationship, even though, we see Essel and Gawain, they're the only people we see them with are each other. Obviously because Essel is a prostitute, we would get the idea that she's probably, being with other people too. But at the same time, it definitely shows that she wants out of it, and that I think the movie's definitely presenting, exactly like you're saying, this other view. But I think that it is taking that further step, that just simple commitment is not good enough. It needs to be a step further, because she wants it to be his lady, as she says, but she says it so charmingly, by the way. He's like, well, I could give you as much gold, more gold than any lady actually has. But she wants that next step beyond it. And I think he's recognizing too that is just too cowardly, or, feels, like he doesn't have that integrity yet to commit to it. And by the way, I mean, man, the chemistry between Dev Patel and Alicia Vikander in that movie is amazing. Like, that's really good.
And we could probably go on for like another 3 hours of this discussion, but can we wrap up on final thoughts? Just kind of see if we have we come to any conclusions then?
I feel like I've said a lot, but I haven't come to any conclusion. But so the I guess I would just wrap up my thoughts with saying that a few of the things that I like that I can nitpick and everything, but there were definitely things I found. I thought it was a very ambitious movie. I thought that Lowry clearly has a very again, ambitious vision for what he wants to do with it, even if I'm not quite sure that he's really trying something here that is not cookie cutter in any way. And I really love the way that it sets up the wildness of England and the sort of external world building that it does. I think it's fantastic. The idea that you can just walk around the corner and there's going to be something weird and strange and wondrous is really engaging, and I like that a lot. I wish that there'd been a little bit more of that, because a lot of the times it was more like walk around the corner and oh my gosh, now you horror and fear. But still, there was a sense in which it's a world bursting with possibility and with opportunity that you could find all of these sorts of things, and I think that fantastical element was very and cinematic world building. I liked that very much. I thought that the use that, and as I was reading the poem today, I was noticing how much physical detail there is in the poem. Like the writer is just so focused on that, and the movie obviously really embraced that as well. That its whole aesthetic is just like let's go for Arthur with plates all over his robe, and the crowns are specially designed, and the use of color is really important, and just like there's so much attention to detail in the art design, and then the whole thing, and I really love just physically the sense of space that I really felt grounded. I felt like I was in there feeling the cold of the mud and the wet and the rain, and all of those things I just really liked a lot. I mean, things that would draw me if I ever back to it. I found the actual plot a bit of a downer, and so that was, I think, one of the things that just made me turned off by the whole thing. But I liked a lot of constituent elements with it, and I might rewatch it at some point without my siblings.
Yeah. For me, oh, I'm sorry, Hannah, were you finished?
That was good.
Yeah, I had a bit of a glitch on my end here. Sorry about that. So yeah, I mean, for me, I think this is a really interesting movie. Everybody should watch it. To me, it's one of the most impressive American films that's come out of the last several years. In part, the biggest reason that I think that is I really see it as David Lowry, as a writer, director, producer, almost kind of like an auteur for this movie, is definitely at a turning point in his life, morally, spiritually. And I really think that he's kind of exploring that, decision that he's going to have to make in his adult, that kind of growing up that he has to do, that he's even talked about in multiple interviews. He's exploring that here. So I think a lot of it ends up being expression and illustration rather than, a lot of good instruction. But I think it's worthwhile because he's saying a lot more bold, I think, things than just about any movie I've seen recently. All these things that we've been talking about here, and the movie definitely inspires great conversation. It inspires conversations like the one we've had here today. We've had lots of great discussions about it, both in person and with my friends who I saw it with, and then have seen it later, and then also just through social media. So I wish that there were better articles out there about it. I think I think, and of course I'm biased, but I think we have 3 good articles here that you should read. There are a few others, and I kind of tried, as I've been finding them, I've been trying to link them in a certain thread on Twitter. But yeah, I think it's interesting, intriguing, and at least trying to investigate a lot of very meaningful themes.
Indeed. I'll just say in my wrap-up, it's prickly, roundabout, maybe even a little disturbing at points, but it is a film that is in constant dialogue with its ideas in ways that I can't really say I don't feel like I didn't get something out of it. I mean, I 9 times out of 10, I'd rather take a film like this than, another studio genre movie doesn't have anything to it. But my problems are just generally with the way it made me feel like that it was trying to interrogate the ideas incompletely, but it is worth seeking out especially if you've read the poem and you kind of have a fascination with these kind of ideas to it. But I think that's a good point to end on. I'll definitely add you guys' articles down in the link dump as well as your social media. But do you guys want to plug anything real quick?
Good, Hannah.
No, I don't think so.
Go follow me on Twitter.
I'm trying to think of the only thing that I've written recently is about 3 Nights, so I feel like I've said plenty about that. I'm hoping to sign some books as an assistant editor soon, but I can't announce any of them yet. So yeah, that's not really, but follow me on Twitter, I guess. I don't know.
What's your Twitter handle?
At Hannah Grace Long.
And she's a good account to follow, trust me. And you,
Ethan?
Yeah, absolutely. You can definitely follow me at a heavy metal pin. And like Tyler said, he'll have that link down there. Right now, some of the main things I'm working on, I've been a lot more focused on creative writing than essays or other kind of articles. Let's see. Yeah, I've written a couple of things for Tyler at his cultural review website. And then also have a couple of websites of my own that I occasionally post stuff on, theflummoxed.com, which is a word I got from The Hobbit first, and it's like one of my favorite words. And then theedblog.com, which, yes, is a joke name. Then other than that, right now I've mostly been working on a collection that I've been trying to get out. I do have some interest in from a small press, but I'm not ready to announce anything about that yet. So yeah, follow me on Twitter. I try to bring all of my interests together in that one spot at a heavy metal pin.
Lots of promoting books that don't exist yet. All right. But yeah, it's great to talk to you both again. I don't know when we'll talk again, but I appreciate that we were able to kind of air all of our grievances in appropriate fashion, which is rare on film YouTube. So this is fun.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Tyler.
Sure.
Yeah, likewise.
Have a good night.
The AntiSocial Network is a Groupthink Productions podcast. Editing, producing, and hosting are by Tyler Hummel. Artwork by Crystal Cowley, and original music was composed by Melissa Lafira and the late Dan Smolla. Like, subscribe, and please let us know what you think about the show in the comments below if you'd like to see anyone interesting be a guest on the show. Thank you for listening.